Welcome to Session 2 of the Applicant Tracking Training Session for CBIZ EMS. The objective of today's training session is to build on what we covered in Session 1, where we published your site. Now we're going to configure your site with a little bit more customization to your organization. Again, today we're going to be using a sample company, going through some examples that are already set up as best practice. Once you complete this training session, we recommend you take that and then apply it to your company in EMS. From your home page, we're going to go to the Settings menu and then the Applicant Tracking submenu. Once you're in the Applicant Tracking homepage, on the second green bar, we're going to go to Advanced Settings. The very first tab that comes up is where we configure your email templates. The email templates are automated emails that are sent from the system. Such things as when an applicant goes online and creates a profile, when they submit an application, or when you'd like to request an interview, those are all types of automated responses that the system will send. The bottom section down here allows you to customize what that subject, what the email subject is, as well as the body of the email. And again, this is an HTML email, so you can do things like change the color of fonts, make different words bold or underlined or italics or things like that. To customize those messages just a little bit, notice there are two keywords, both the applicant and position. So if you want to use the applicant's first and last name, then type exactly as it's displayed here with a bracket, the word applicant, and then close the bracket. Same for the specific position that they applied for. These are standard responses. However, the interview request as well as the application decline emails, you will have the ability to customize those one-on-one before you send those if you don't want to send a standard email. The other thing that you can do on the email template tab when you're configuring this portal is choose to email the manager when an applicant applies to a job posting to which they have been identified as a manager responsible for that hiring. As soon as the applicant clicks Submit Application, the email address for that manager on file will be sent a notification. The second tab is Job Categories. And this is what the applicant will search by. They can search by location, a couple other different criteria, maybe keywords, things like that. But job category is one of the more common items. A lot of times this may be an industry or if you have specific tasks or departments. As an example, maybe sales or marketing or accounting. Those are types of jobs or categories of jobs that an applicant may want to search by to narrow the window down. Job types. And again, as I go through these, notice at the top to create a new one, you just type in the information and click Save. Job types would be set up to help the candidates identify the type of job. So you may have a full-time, a part-time, it may be temporary work, it may be contract work. Whatever the different types of jobs are that you post, then you want to display that to the candidates. You would set those up here under the Job Types tab. Under referral sources, we talked a little bit about it, but the benefit of referral sources is so that you can track where your applicants are coming from. So for example, if you post positions maybe on CareerBuilder or Monster or any of the other different types of job boards, then you could set up those entities here in this section, and all we're doing is creating where you post positions to. A little bit later in a session coming up, we'll talk about how if you have a referral source, then we'll create a unique URL every time you post a new position, and then that URL then can go out and you can post it to CareerBuilder, for example, and everyone who clicks on that, you'll be able to track that they came from that site. Okay. So in summary here, you just want to set up any place that you post positions to for future use when you add a position. The Process step tab allows you to create custom process steps based on your process that's unique to your organization. By default, this will be blank. I've set up a couple examples here. Different organizations have different steps, so you may have 1, 2, or 3 steps. You may have 50 steps. And the couple options here, one, you want to set the step up, so you just type in the step name. So let's say that maybe a step here is we're going to follow up. I see that my last step I have done here is orientation. Let's say that step 10 is a 90-day review. The step order, if I look down here, I just want to grab my last step if I want to put it in that order, or if I want to insert it inside of here, then we can do that as well. But let's do step order number 10. And then, do we want to make it visible to the applicant? And what that box does there is, if you allow for profile creation, which we talked about in session 1's training, if you allow for an applicant to come back in and log back into the system, then they will see this step if you check that box. So basically, they'll log in and say that you are currently on the X step. So again, 90-day review doesn't make a lot of sense because they're probably already an employee at that point. But let's say that it said first interview, and we see that we have that visible to the applicant down here. That when a candidate who is in that process step logs in, their current status is going to be first interview. So we're going to go ahead and save this. We're going to not check that it's visible to the applicant. And anything that's not visible, they'll just see the last step that was visible. So you see over here, steps 4 through 9 are not visible to the applicant, or sorry, steps 4 through 8 are not visible to the applicant. So if they were to be in step 6 and they logged in, they're still going to be setting on step 3, is what their status would say. All right, the next tab is decline reasons. And this just allows you to kind of track maybe why you declined an applicant if you ever want to come back later down the road and find out maybe why you declined them. It doesn't give a ton of information. It should be just a short description. And then you can actually look at the notes and comments on the applicant themselves if there's more specific details. Manager permissions. If we scroll down here, the easiest way to kind of understand this tab is just this legend at the top. And so you see that you have 6 columns down at the bottom. And to go through each one of those real quick, an administrator, basically they have access to the entire applicant tracking, including all the settings that we're going through right now. So if you want a specific manager, and again, we're talking about managers, not administrators. If you want a manager to have an administrator-like access just to this module, then you would check the name. Beside their name down here, you would check that they are an administrator. If they're a recruiter, which basically means that they have access to all the settings except for the information that we went over in the last training session and the information we're going over today. So they can create job postings, they can possibly approve things, they just can't change advanced settings, and they can't configure the recruiting portal. The next option is, can they create a job posting? It's fairly common for a manager to be able to create a job posting, or at least some senior level managers to create the job posting. They would go in, set the job up, add the job description, put the date that they want to fill it, how many employees they want to hire for that position. And then the next column beside of that is, do their job postings require approval? So again, it's fairly common for them to create job postings, but it's fairly uncommon for those to just be automatically approved and posted out to the live site. So you may have a manager. Let's take this first person down here, Shane, for example, and say that he can create a job posting. So we would put a checkbox here. And most commonly, you would probably also, for most typical mid-level managers, put a checkbox also that says job postings require approval as well. What this means is when Shane creates a job posting, a trigger will be sent. We'll talk about workflows here in just a few minutes, but that will trigger something that says, hey, Shane, we have identified that his postings require approval, and he's created one, so something needs to happen. That fifth column kind of ties into the previous two. Are they a job posting improver? So there has to be someone, at least one person in the organization, that can approve jobs if you have anyone who's checked in this previous column where their postings require approval. So we just said that Shane, as a manager, his job postings do require approval. Now we need to make someone an approver, and you can have as many people as you want to be approvers. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Shane to be a job posting approver if his require approval. If I want him to approve his own, basically I uncheck that, and every time he creates a job, it's automatically approved. So let's leave Shane checked there, and let's just come down and say that Larry down here is a approver. we'll talk about in a few minutes how that, Larry will get an email and how all that flow happens. We'll talk about that on the workflow tab in just a few minutes. And then last but not least is, can they hire applicants? So we talked about before, a manager could get an email when they have a new applicant. They're going to review that information. They may be very vital to the decision-making process on whether you hire them or not. But inside of the system, can they click the hire button and make them an official employee in the system? Typically, it's common that most mid-level managers, a lot of times even senior-level managers, do not have the ability to hire the applicant because there are some fields that you need to be concerned with, integration and workflow processes and compliance with new hire paperwork and things like that. So typically, the can hire applicants is limited to usually some administrators, if not very senior managers. The bottom two checkboxes right below the legend, do you want to restrict your managers to job postings by category? Remember, a couple tabs ago, we set up job categories such as accounting or finance or sales or marketing or something like that. And typically, you have a manager who's only over a department or two. And if you want, you can set up the restrictions so that, let's say that, for example, Shane here only was over the accounting department. And I only wanted him to have freedom to create job postings that were related to accounting or to view accounting applicants or to hire accounting applicants. Okay? If that's the case, then I want to restrict my managers based on job categories. So I'd check that box, and then I click the manager's name to define which category or categories he or she has access over. So let's say we used another example. Shane was over accounting. We'd check the accounting box and click Save Category Assignments there. The last checkbox there, applicant profile, read only to managers and recruiters. What that would do is both managers and recruiters, if they have access to seeing applicants, that's all they can do. They can't make comments. They can't be able to change or update the applicant profile or their application itself. Okay? And that is very common to do. However, if you have candidates who may not self-identify their gender or ethnicity, a lot of times you do give the managers the ability to do that. If that's the case, you would uncheck this box here. Once you set this up, you would want to make sure you save all of your permissions. And last, I've pointed out and talked about several times down here, who is a manager. You'll see these listed down here on the left-hand side. That list is generated. Anyone who has the manager checkbox under their employee demographic setting, there is a manager checkbox, and as long as that box is checked, that's what populates who is a manager in the system. All right, let's move on to additional questions. This is something that we talked about how to turn it on the application in our last training session. So today what we're going to cover is how do we build those additional questions. And in this tab here, this is for the entire group of applicants. So anyone who applies to the organization, they're going to see these questions. Later when we build jobs, which is a later training session, we'll see how we can add additional questions that are very specific to that one position. So step one is to enter the question. And the first thing that you want to consider is what type of question is this going to be? Is it going to be open-ended, multiple choice? Do I want to have maybe options where they can have multiple answers, not just one, multiple choice answers? So let's say the question is, what is your salary requirement? All right, and so let's set this up as a range. We're going to do check boxes, or there's not more than one right answer. They just have one range that they're probably looking for. So the short question is just a label for you. No one else is going to see that, so let's just say salary range. Okay. Display order, if I look down at the bottom, I see that I already have a couple questions down here. I want it to be fourth in line. And the reply type tells me a radio list would just be a buttons, kind of like you see right below here where there's yes and no. Those are both radio buttons. A checkbox list means they can have more than one right answer. They just put a check mark by all that would apply. drop-down list. That's what we're in right now. This current list that we're in is a drop-down list, and it only allows one right answer. You have a text box, 3 choices to where you can either do text, where they have to type alpha characters in, then text box where they have to type numeric information in, and then text maybe where they enter a date. Okay. The multiple line text box, you have 3 options there. It just puts a character limit. So if you don't want a long reply, then you would limit it to something like maybe 250. 5,000 characters is a pretty big response, and so that accommodates most any reply an applicant would want to give. So for purposes of a salary range, let's do something like a radio list. Do we want to require the applicant to answer? By default, it'll say no, but we do want to require the applicant to tell us what their salary requirements are. And if we're going to build multiple questions and they're going to be the same, we would retain the response for the next question. That doesn't apply to this situation. Okay. So let's go over and add some, before we add the question, let's go over and add some of our options first. So let's just say that if we're building a salary range, let's do 0 to maybe 30,000. And I'm just going to do a couple here, for example. I'm not going to do a ton, although you have unlimited options here. And we're going to put that in order number 1. After you create that, click Add Option. Let's create another option as soon as that saves and refreshes. By the way, the most common mistake is you click Add Question before you add your options, which is fine. You can always come back and edit your question and add your options later. So let's just add one more example here. And let's do 30,000 to, let's do 60,000. We'll put that in the second order right after the first one. If you make a mistake and you need to delete something, then you click the black X, and that removes the option. So let's let that refresh, and now what we're going to do, we have a couple options here. Let's go over and click Add Question. All right, so that'll appear down at the bottom. And we'll come back in a later training session, and we'll see that question that comes up as we go through an application. A couple things to keep in mind before we leave this tab. This is a question that all applicants will see. You do have the ability at the job, if it's a very unique circumstance and that may be a question that you just specifically don't want that job to answer, then you can remove a question from a specific job. If you want to delete the question from the entire system, then we'll put a check mark down here and click Delete Selected Records. The last thing I'd like to go through up here is the Sync Questions button. Sync Questions is usually done after you have job descriptions put in the system. As you're building this and you don't have really job descriptions or jobs posted yet, then that doesn't come into play. But basically what it does is sync the latest questions that you set across all current existing job postings. So let's say that I've gone in, I've created five job postings, and then I decide, hey, I want to add another question. I come in here, I build my question. That's not going to go out to those 5 that already exist unless I click the Sync Questions button. All right, so let's move along. The last tab in today's training session is workflows. There is a training session later in the implementation process that define globally workflows and how to build a workflow. For purposes of today's training, we're just going to talk about how workflows fit into applicant tracking. Generically speaking, workflows are just a series of steps that need to happen when the system identifies a triggering event. So if you look here, we have 3 simple steps that we're going to go through. We're going to define what the event is. So within applicant tracking, there are 6 triggering events. The job posting submitted for approval. So again, back to the manager permissions tab that we talked about, if a manager was flagged as someone who required approval on their job postings, if that happened, the system's going to be alerted to say there was an event, and it's going to come here to say, based on that, is there something that I need to do? So if there was a workflow or a series of steps, maybe you wanted an email to go to maybe their manager and their manager's manager, then we would set up that event. If there was a specific job category, so again, we set up that manager before he was only over the accounting department. So any job posting that was submitted for approval in the accounting department, maybe we had a certain series of steps, and we'll define that in a workflow. Again, we're going to define how to set up workflows and build to this list in here and customize those in a later training session. So assume that we already had the workflow built, we would set that up. A couple other events that I just want to highlight and define. When a job posting has been approved, so remember back to the manager permissions page again, we set up who could approve jobs. So a good example of that, maybe you have an accounting person who wants to be notified once something's been approved so that they can go ahead and start forecasting the budget for that position. Job posting open, and we'll talk about that in our very next training session, how you create a job posting. And by default, the job posting is just pending. So you create it, but you don't necessarily post it. When you open it up, ready for candidates to apply for it, that's what that event is when you've opened it up. When the job posting has been filled, then you've closed it and you've met your requirement for the number of employees that you want to fill. That's what that event would be triggered by. Job posting closed, meaning you've probably found someone, you made a contingent offer, you just haven't completely filled the position at that point. And then last but not least is application submitted. So this is going to be your probably highest volume trigger in this module. If you want a series of steps to happen when an application has been submitted. So by default, the only thing that will automatically happen is the manager and or the recruiter would get an email. But if in addition to you wanted a series of steps to happen, then a trigger in this module would be on every application that's submitted. All right. Like always, if you have any questions about anything that we covered today, please don't hesitate to reach out to your account manager. Session 3 will go into creating job postings and publishing those out to the site so that applicants can start applying for the position. Thanks.